Okay, short reviews for January 5th. Of course, I'm way behind on this one, but there was other things to do on the 4th. So yeah, this is a pretty short one. It's about 7 items. Probably going to keep these a little bit shorter in terms of number of albums this year, and I don't think I'll do like a named column again. I'll just stick with just short reviews. Keeps it straightforward. You know what you're clicking on, and uh, these are mostly beyond the first week. There just really wasn't a lot that came out in the first couple weeks of January. So we just got right into Graw's album. I'm a fan of this band and some of their related bands. And I believe the vocalist of Dark Funeral is the main guy behind this band. And they're pretty good. It's a band that has leaned into more traditional Swedish black metal traits in the past, while also kind of beginning to resemble almost like a groovier sort of Tillis or Vreed style on this album, which it's just distinctly different. I think that's the interesting thing about this record is that they haven't really leaned into more than their themes, but and the music has evolved. It's gotten much more polished, much more memorable, and I really liked Boston, the previous album. I'd reviewed it when it came out in 2018, and I almost like this one a little bit better. I think that it's not black and roll, but it's catchier. There's a lot of conviction behind the vocals, and like there's a Bathory cover in there too. So they kind of hit a lot of things I like all at once. So I thought this was worth mentioning. Turbid North is a band that I believe originated in Alaska, and this is their third album. And they've since, maybe even, I think after the first album, they moved to Texas. And after that, as the lineup solidified, they went from sort of like a metalcore influenced progressive death metal band that was already kind of hard to pin down to more of a progressive sludge metal influenced, almost even alternative metal band. And if we go and look at what the decline is, it's not that. It's not the thing they were before that. So it's a different thing. And I wasn't really sure how to um, like who this album is for. I think that it's aiming for sort of people who enjoy music that is catchier and very aggro, like a Gojira. But they also show some love for like a modern Napalm Death sound on here too. So uh, it's kind of death grind. It's kind of sludge. It's still kind of popular rock and or alternative metal in a way. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of songs that just kind of fill space and seem to be aiming for more of a psychedelic edge. And they cut back on the alternative rock kind of catchiness, the schmaltziness of like typical stuff that's made for teenagers. Um, and now this is just it sounds a little bit more of a serious record that still has a lot of eclectic influences. So it it just didn't end up being for me, and I think that was kind of the case with the previous two albums. And it just kind of comes down to what are you looking for in heavy music, and I just can't put my finger on this band. There's something I like about their music quite a bit, but then there's the songs just never stick with me, and I never understand the direction they're taking with them. So it's still an interesting listen. Whereas like a record like Tidal Waves, The Lord Knows, I understood what it was right away. I like this type of stoner rock, heavy metal or heavy rock, heavy psychedelic rock kind of thing. And yeah, I mean the vocal sounds a little bit like Soundgarden. It's a Swedish stoner rock band. You kind of get the idea of what it is right away, and like a lot of Scandinavian stoner bands, they really have one mode that they do quite well, and some of them really expand over time, and some of them just lean into the one thing they do really well. So far, these guys have kind of been all over the place in terms of like expanding what they're doing, pulling into different types of songs. But this one manages to just kind of be catchy and kind of infectious enough to where uh, I was happy to just kind of jump into the album and just stick with it for a couple of hours, and that yielded pretty good results. I couldn't complain about it. Um, there was just after I sat, when I was sitting with it in the moment, and I picked it up a couple of times. It really makes you want to sit with it and just enjoy the sort of vibe of it. The lyrics are pretty interesting. They're not a very serious band in general, but when I pulled away from it and I thought about it afterwards, I think at the point of reflection, it's just all right. It's not groundbreaking, but it is very good. It makes enough of a first impression that you know it will be popular with the 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 more of typical stoner rock crowd that goes for a big first impression. So it holds up in a way, but I don't think it quite delivers the excitement of the first couple of songs kick out there. So, uh, Negative Vortex is. I thought this was pretty interesting because it's a not so typical death doom metal album from musicians who really came up in the late '80s, early '90s death metal scene in Brazil, and a lot of their work was kind of culminated in the endoparasites iconoclasty of the flesh, which I sort of equate. It's kind of like you know how Spain has unbounded terror. There are a couple more examples like this in Brazilian death metal, but iconoclasty of flesh kind of has that. It's kind of a reaction to how grotesque Symphony of Sickness was in terms of its rhythms and all that. So anyway, they've got quite a long past. That album released in I think '93, and kind of got buried in a lot of the more popular Cogumelo releases over the years. This isn't directly related, other than one of the musicians was the guitarist and I believe songwriter for that band. And so this music is apparently more influenced by earlier Cathedral. And you get that not only by some of the guests that show up from sort of British Doom of that certain era, but also in some of the Death Doom styled approaches that they take throughout. And there are some black metal influences in there. There's some Swedish death metal and some British, death doom in there too. I think that it just didn't stick with me. Like I couldn't just pinpoint exactly one moment that just nailed it. But I appreciated the experience as a whole. I thought the album art is pretty considerable. I think the sound of the record is great. I think there are plenty of riffs to enjoy and a nice guitar tone and a lot of interesting touches of black metal and whatnot. But it didn't. It just didn't stick with me as like a gem, like something that it was gonna like stick around for me. Um, and I'd say similar for Celestial Scourge's Dimensions Unfurled, which is uh, an EP which kind of reintroduces this brutal technical death metal band from Norway, and they have members of Blood Red Throne in here, which kind of quickly it earned some of my interest because that was a band that I liked in the kind of the late '90s, early 2000s. A little bit too overblown for me now, but I still appreciate what they do. And so, as a fan of just brutal death metal of a certain era that became more and more technical over time, I really appreciate where they're coming from with this record. And really, my only comment is I'd like to just hear more of it because 20 minutes kind of just blazes past, and you know we don't we don't get a ton of slam. We don't get a lot of the dorky deathcore shit that you get in most releases in this style these days. So I'd like to see what they do with the full length, and maybe lose that this dual tone faded logo coloration that a lot of groups are doing for their album covers. It's just it doesn't look good. It no, it, maybe that's just my own taste, but did not do not like that aspect of the first impression. But it's a solid album. Um, I was a little bit more excited about Faith Extractor's Contempt for a Veiled Dimension. I think this is a very strong death metal album that uh, comes from people who they've been around forever in a lot of bands, and the style that they sort of lean into here is what I would describe here as a little bit Corellian Isthmus, the first Amorphous album, and a little bit Intestine Ballism. So there's melody inherently happening here, but it's in the it's I believe this is an Ohio-based, yeah, Cincinnati-based group, and you sort of get that Midwest death metal feeling there, where there is maybe there's a little bit of Swedish death metal, there's some brutal death metal, there's the American tradition of death metal in their music. And all that I'm saying right there is that this album has tons of riffs and great ones. The guy's played on many albums. I don't think I've disliked anything he's put out. So uh, this is just another one to rack up. I think that it does deserve some attention for the riff work. I think the rhythm guitar work is especially fine on all the Faith Extractors work. So definitely uh, check out the previous album if you'd like this one. Kind of follows a similar thread, but this one introduces like a little bit more atmosphere and whatnot. Uh, So yeah, we kind of just ride right through these when there's so few of them. But Not is Norwegian, what I would consider a post metal band, and this is more of a psychedelic experience. It is a long build towards a moment, and I think across 3 tracks, each one is extended in length. And I, so what can I say? There's members of like a session member, a drummer from Enslaved, and then some of these folks have played in quite different bands, Krakow and Malignant Eternal. And I don't think that means anything to most people unless you're really in tune with those various subgenres. But think of it as like a little bit of a krautrock esque modus. Not I'm not saying this sounds like Amon Duel or whatever, but um, there's a progressive rock kind of groove behind all of it that doesn't feel like modern and cheesy post metal, but there's still a really interesting use of synthesizer throughout this thing. So, with a bit of patience and maybe accepting the fact that you might only listen to it once and get the real effect out of it, this is pretty cool. Um, the last track, I don't know if it pays off as much as the rest, but it does have like the peak of it is the coolest part of the album, even though maybe the first song just is a little bit more redeeming up front. So an experiential record at the least. Um, so yeah, I don't know, decent amount of variety, not a ton of albums up front. So check those out if that sounds interesting.